Okay, we're all ready here. We've been here for so. Third set, Grace. Okay, I'm going to call the Thursday, May 15th, 2025 meeting of the City Charter Review Committee to order. You have the roll call, please, Grace.
Diane Gutierrez.
Present.
Cam Wheel.
Here.
Jonathan Foreman.
Here.
Jeffrey Hink.
Present.
Veronica Wilkerson Johnson.
Present.
Ruben Martinez. Jill Rhodey.
Here.
Gail Krudoff. Lynn Richardson.
Here. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. So I'll move approval of the agenda as presented. Is there a second? Support. Moved by Gutierrez, supported by Wilkerson Johnson. Any changes or additions? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. The agenda is approved. Next is 1.3, approval of the minutes. We have the minutes, and first I want to say thank you, Grace. That was a very comprehensive coverage of the minutes of last meeting. Captured the discussion very well. So I'll move approval of the minutes of the May 1st, 2025 meeting. Is there a second? Second. Moved by Gutierrez, seconded by Wow. Any changes or corrections?
I have a correction.
Okay.
In the communication section, I'll give you a copy of this, Grace. It said she was able to clear up the citizens' confusion. Maybe. So I did not. I shared with them what I shared in the meeting and that I found it articulated in the whole New York City Act. But I can't say that I persuaded their concern.
So what are you amending under what point?
It's
Under while?
communications and 2-point communications, and it's under while. And I've got a printout of my correction for you.
Can you read that for us?
Sure. After clarification from Councilmember Meadows, she looked further into the Chief Executive Officer title and discovered it specified within the Home Rule Cities Act. So there was nothing to be done in the charter. But I did not change any minds that I made. I can't. Yeah, it would have been great if that was all you needed to hear. But
Okay. So with that amendment, is there anything else? I'll just say there's just a small typo under communications from the audience. Patrick Rose's second bullet is proposal 1 passed. The second line, just forgot the D. So with those amendments, anything else? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved for May 1st, 2025. Now we have written communications in our packet. We have quite a few things in there. They were posted last week. And we'll move on to communications from the audience. And oh man, we're just better line up here.
So,
Yes.
I would kind of like to chat through the city manager's portion of the communication.
How about we do that under?
That's what I was just gonna say. So that's
But we do that under.
okay, and or we could move it because I'm looking at the FOIA stuff, like we could move that under the FOIA discussion.
You want to do it under FOIA? We can do it.
Well, there was quite a bit.
You
But
decide where
yeah,
you-
okay, well, we can, wherever you want to put it, but I'd like to kind of walk through and talk about what they're tied to.
Okay, let's do it under FOIA because that's specific to that. When we talk about our transparency and public acts part, is that where you're thinking?
There, well, because there was, we started off with a reflection on the library village passing or the, when I'm walking through those and,
Okay.
and reflecting on their time.
Okay, so we'll make sure we bring that up under that. Yeah, sorry.
No.
So we don't have anyone in our audience for those that are watching us. So we'll move on to communications from committee members. You have at your table here, there's 2 things for you to read. One is from Ruben. He had reached out to Mr. Hollister and he got that back, put that down. And we're going to talk about that probably at our next meeting. This will be some good information for your thoughts on that. And he'll be here at the next meeting to also discuss that. And then I put together this whiteboard list so you could sort of see what things we've added to that along the way. Of course, as soon as I sent it off to Grace, there was one additional one. And it's, and I would just want to add to that, it's request to an ordinance for a timely amendment to charter amendments. We talked about that last meeting. So we'll just add that to the list, and this will probably be something we'll discuss at our next meeting. So if you think of anything in addition to that, we'll put it on there when we're talking about it next week. So those are my two communications. Anyone else have anything else? Maybe none. We're going to continue discussion on 3.4, which is our old business. Like to start that discussion. This is our misdemeanors in office. In office, I'm sorry. This time again, also, we'll see on the whiteboard, it also goes to 4.96.2. We have some interrelationships there. So, Mr. Foreman, I know you wanted to have some further discussion. So why don't we start with you and put you on the spot?
Yeah, so, it was for something that we had talked about pretty early on in our year looking over the charter, and we always said we were gonna come back to it, and I figured we're approaching the end here. So it's a good time to come back to it. So that's why I asked for it to be added to today's agenda. I don't know if we were gonna be keeping a running tally of instances in the charter where misconduct in office was referenced. I'm not sure we ever really found any other. I think Jeff could correct me there if I'm wrong.
3.13 also, I think.
Yeah, so we found them early on in a couple spots in chapters 3. Not sure we did beyond that.
Well, if I remember correctly, you talked about adding 3.4 B for conviction of a domestic assault and battery.
Yeah, did we ever pass that? I don't know. Okay,
That's why it's still on there.
understood.
So we have that.
Because we're also going to be just generally discussing, if I remember correctly, we're going to be generally looking for if misconduct in office was described elsewhere in the charter. And I think beyond 3.13, it
So
was
try 4.9. What is that?
I believe it's 3.13, 4.7P, 4.9, 12.5 are the ones that speak to violations being misconduct. No,
What was the last one? 4.7G
4.7G, 4.9, and 12.5.
and 6.2. Yeah, that's what I'm getting. Oh,
Yeah, and that just references what a penalty is for misconduct in office, but doesn't know a specific act as misconduct.
oh,
we amended 4.9 at one point. I'm correct about that because we made it so that it wouldn't punish employees in a harsher manner than it would punish officers.
yes, we did have that one. On January 9th was amended. I'm sorry, I don't have that date. This, I think February 6th is around the time that was.
It's referenced in 6.2, but it doesn't make any act. 6.2, it doesn't make anything constitute misconduct in office there.
So then we can leave that off of our list to look at because this reference it doesn't describe it any further. You okay with that? So we'll pass that on.
So
12.5. Yes.
12.5 does, yes, 12.5 does list there. So I'm wondering if maybe it makes sense to consolidate or to cross-reference at the very least those other sections. So that way it's not leaving misconduct in office to be this amorphous thing, typically in statutes and things like that, if we're referencing another statute, or if we say, we reference that statute, say, as defined in blah, blah, blah. So I wonder if we should amend 3.4 to add the assault and battery domestic violence conviction, then also to add a number 5 saying, or as something along the lines of as defined elsewhere in this charter, including but not limited to the specific section. That way, it's all encompassed in one place. You don't have to go do a control left to find it.
Chapter 3.4 only applies to elective to the officers.
Correct.
All these other provisions reference any office. Penalty if you're not an officer, conduct an office.
Yeah, it removes automatically, right?
So,
Those might be covered by state statute and other ordinance.
yeah, I know we've talked about this a bunch of times, but no one's ever come up with what are the other ordinances or
Tony can bring it.
statutes.
Well, I mean, it really depends. I mean, when you look at 12.5, for example, we go back to it. I mean, I don't have like the MCL or anything like that, but I mean, it's like misuse of public funds like that. It's a lot more than a misdemeanor under our charter, right? And so, and I don't know if that's something like John, performed review, have any idea or any thought about whether listing these specifically as, persons using the proceeds thereof for any other person. It says any person who violates this provision shall be deemed guilty of misconduct in office. Like, does that foreclose us on seeking prosecution under state law claims? I mean, I don't think.
I wouldn't think so. It would be a different body speaking, right? Misconduct in office as defined in the charter is a civil penalty. It's not a criminal penalty. So because it's just removal from office, doesn't subject you to any loss of liberty. So I would think that it wouldn't even create double jeopardy issues or anything like that. Would be my off the cuff answer on that. And I think you're nodding agreement. So I would think it would be safe and would not preclude the city from seeking other criminal remedies just by removing someone from office as misconduct in office for the county. Yeah.
So let me go to your 5, under 3.4 D5. You said as defined, that you would like it as defined elsewhere in this charter. Do you want to enumerate the other places, or do you want, like, I thought you were going the other direction where anytime it said that, say C 3.4.
I think it would make sense to enumerate them there, just so that way it's clear and in one spot, all of it, it's what Pam said. We just want to be able to look in one place to at least know where to look. So I think that's the reason it makes sense to have that all there.
That's great if we're doing a comprehensive review, but if there's a single amendment to the charter,
That's why I
they
wanted,
captured.
that's why I wanted to say including but not limited to. So that way, if misconduct in office is defined elsewhere, and the catch that isn't made in 3.4.
Or my point is a future amendment to the charter that addresses misconduct in the next, another section isn't listed.
No, I understand.
So those words, including but not limited to, chapter so and so.
But I also think there's an obligation, if that does occur, to retroactively look at conflict.
Right, and we would hope that would happen, but I think this
If you
protects.
got- That's why you got the,
But
yeah.
yeah, I think it
You got the-
protects.
If it doesn't, but
Right.
it should, because my concern was, will we know to update this as a location?
Right.
But then I thought, well, control F.
But I mean, if we do it this way in 10 to 15, we come across so many places where things are adequately cross-referenced. So that if we include catch-all language that also leaves room open,
And the rest.
right, then it protects from any future inadequacies.
Issues that are referenced.
Right.
Could I ask, yeah, why wouldn't you want that to be in a single location? Like, not only the things which would constitute removal from office, but unless there's some need to reference that in another section of the,
I think things like,
why not just have it with regard to the council?
because if I'm understanding your question correctly, I think, for example, in 12.5, it makes sense to have that penalty there where it's appropriate in context. And then if we try to list it out of context in 3.4, then you're kind of lifting it from its context and leaving it open for misinterpretation, especially on something where we talked about a long time ago that this happens by operation of law. It just happens. You don't want to leave any room for misinterpretation if you're lifting something from its context and putting it in another place. And cross-reference 12.5, cross-reference the things in chapter 4 where they're appropriately in their context, then it avoids that potential for misinterpretation.
But Mark, are you suggesting that there be one location where we define misconduct and then we refer back to that? See this definition of misconduct in the misconduct section?
That just seems like if I'm a general public member and I'm looking, hey, I said misconduct, I'd like to be able to say, oh, it's in section such and such, and that's the definition. And those are the acts which constitute that.
And I think the way I'm proposing it does do that. It just might require an extra page. Well,
Yeah, got it. I just want to note that also that for the other public officials that Jeff was referring to, that's MCL 750.505. It adopts the common law, and basically it's a felony. And it's misfeasance. The definition of misfeasance and nonfeasance constitute a violation of that statute. And so if those acts are
4.9, once we change that to 12.5, can apply to non-elected officers. Felony.
I think I was thinking about that too. I think by definition, because the only officers of the city are the city council members, only,
That's not.
well, they're the only elected officers, right? They're-
We have another bike word,
3.4
administrative versus elective.
Starts with any elected office.
Yes,
So that's only gonna apply. Elected.
right. They're the only ones that can be removed by operation of law. The others have to be removed because they serve
Why I
it.
keep saying that, what is Mark's point, what is misconduct in office, the other two sections where it's referenced for non-elected officers.
Administrative officer.
Are we gonna say that it's a state law felony? Wouldn't,
The city can't say that. The city can't punish anything by more than 90 days.
so then there's gotta be some definition of misconduct in office for a non-elected officer. Or 3.4, not the place to house all that, 'cause it's particularly elected city, sorry, elected city office.
Are we asking the other officers?
I think we do that in 6.2. And it makes it a misdemeanor for the non-elective officers to commit one of those offenses.
Yeah, all the 3.4 does is reference that a misconduct in office, in addition to any of the criminal results in a vacancy in office. So it shows that a vacancy in an elected office occurs if you're convicted of a felony, if you're any reason by state law, if special meetings or misconduct in office.
But I don't know if I think 6.2 by operation of its language. If not, this would be an ordinance fix. Makes anything that is misconduct in office to also be a 90-day misdemeanor. And that would include for both the elective and the administrative officers. But I don't know if that requires an ordinance to enforce that, or if it would just act by operation of 6.2. That would be something, that would be for a criminal lawyer to figure out, yeah.
We'll have to look at whether there is an operative. Typically, a section like this would say, and the council should enact an ordinance consistent with this. So we'll see if they did. Because it's got to be.
Yeah, I don't remember. Okay, but the question I have for you is, if you've got 750.505, which some case law said applies even to deputy sheriffs, so it applies to all of our officers, administrative officers. Not our employees, but administrative officers. Does this trump anything that we might do, like to turn it into a misdemeanor, because this is a felony?
That's what I was asking John earlier, but I mean, I don't think it does, but section 6.2 does have language.
It's a state law.
Right, it says declare by this charter to constitute misconduct in office, I'm sorry, no punishment for the violation of any city ordinance or the commission by any officer of the city of any act declared to be by this charter to constitute misconduct in office shall exceed the maximum penalty permitted by state law. So I think that's saying that it establishes that as a misdemeanor. It can also be charged as a felony, but it can't, under state law, but you can't charge more than the maximum under a state law charge, like
So-
you can stack them.
I read that a little differently, and I think it might be less poorly worded. So I read this as, because the state law can punish any state employee or any city employee, regardless of what the city says. So if someone commits an act that constitutes malfeasance in office or misconduct in office, and it's a 5-year felony, regardless of what this charter says, the state can pursue prosecution. I think what 6.2, what that last sentence means, when it says that nothing that constitutes misconduct in office shall exceed the maximum penalty permitted by state law. I think that references back to the Home Rule City Act, which says that the city cannot penalize something more than 90 days. So the way I read 6.2, and I could be totally wrong, but the way I read 6.2 is that the city is permitted to pass an ordinance punishing city officials who commit misconduct in office, but they cannot, obviously, because of Home Rule Act, cannot punish that by more than 90 days and a $500 fine.
Certainly, I mean, that part is certainly true correctly.
Right.
What I'm seeing is.
I just wanted to quickly ask, so are these independent, for the layperson, like you understand it as, but for the layperson, are these, they're independent of each other? How will a person kind of cross-reference to know?
That's what I would address, yeah. So I think it should be 6.2.a, the council shall provide in each ordinance that prohibits or requires any act for the punishment of those who violate the provision. That's one. Then B is the other one. So that's just saying, right, that there must be a punishment associated with the violation of an ordinance. Like you can't write an ordinance that doesn't have a sanction. Isn't that what the first section is saying? In each ordinance that prohibits something, they're required to articulate a punishment for that violation to everybody who violates the ordinance. So that to me that's one thing. And then the next part, no punishment for the violation of a city ordinance, period, can be beyond the maximum penalty allowed by the state. I don't know why the specification for anybody. That's just right. Like, I don't know how it almost sounds like, well, if a council person's violating the ordinance, they're going to get twice as much of a punishment, or something. Like there's some special handling. Maybe they should because it's their ordinance, but yeah, is that, it seems like, and then, okay, so Joe Q public violates the ordinance, there will be an articulated punishment for that violation. Okay, and then it will not exceed the penalty permitted by state law. Okay, what does that have to do with the
Because of the
commissioners and?
So because there's and I might be misunderstanding, I apologize. if I am.
Well, I'm just freestyling my notes here, so.
So the ordinance part, the first sentence, you're absolutely right. That it provides that, the council is required to provide each ordinance that prohibits or requires any act, the punishment for those who violate its provisions. In almost every case, almost every ordinance that's a criminal ordinance, at least, that's either 90 days of jail or 93 days of jail, with one exception for 180.
But any ordinance needs a consequence. Otherwise,
well,
it's
there's
just hot air.
There's a general ordinance in our code of ordinances that says violation of any ordinance is punishable by 90 days of jail.
Oh, okay.
So that it's a catch-all that says it's,
But
and that's,
not parking on the street between two.
no, that's clearly defined as a civil infraction elsewhere. Um,
I'm all for that if it's a repeated violator.
so the way, and so where the confusion I think is coming in, and I'm worried we might be overcomplicating this, I'm worried that I'm the one that did it. But it's because punishment for the violation of any city ordinance shall not exceed the maximum penalty permitted by state law. No punishment shall exceed the maximum penalty by state law. And then there's or the commission by any officer of the city or any act declared by the charter to constitute misconduct in office also shall not exceed.
Right on, that's too, like a next point, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
That makes more sense to me.
And I get the confusion. I think we have to remember that this is gonna apply to a very small group of people. And in theory, those people who are serving us through acting as either an elected official or administrative official should be aware of their obligations. So I'm not sure that we need to add a lot of language that's gonna just really complicate things, as opposed to just cross-referencing everything back in 4.3 to say, if you're looking for other things, these are the places you need to go to look.
But this is,
So I'm a department head and I, in my personal life, violate an ordinance. That is a misconduct of office.
It's not.
yeah, no,
It
that's
is
what
not.
I'm saying.
That's how you word it.
That's-
No, I tried not to. Maybe
That's how it sounds right now.
Right, and when you're saying it just applies to a few people, I'm reading the main point of this is applying to everyone, that or your punishment will not exceed what the state allows, and that the council will be required to put a sanction in any ordinance.
And if you're an officer of the city, it's a misconduct of office.
See, that's a problem, right?
Right, I think so. That's,
Yeah, one other question, because I want to go back to 4.9 and just review my notes on this. I thought there was a decision to make that specifically applicable to administrative officers.
Right, you did that wording.
Okay, okay.
But that was misconduct of office. This seems to be a general penalty.
This is a penalty for failure to comply with investigative request.
Right, well, this 6.2 is just a penalty. It's FYI penalties. They will be associated with every ordinance and they will not exceed the maximums that the state allows.
So can we just do what Pam suggested in one case? Put the first sentence as A. First sentence A, 6.2A, and 6.2B, the rest of that.
I think the second sentence was causing the confusion. So I think a way we could break it down.
Yeah, Johnson
Sorry.
pulled that out of me at last. That seems, okay, this is everybody, and now this is the part that is related to the.
Yeah, I think if we wanted to clarify, we could do 6.2A. The council shall provide in each ordinance that prohibits or requires any act for the punishment of those who violate its provisions. No punishment for the violation of any city ordinance shall exceed the maximum penalty permitted by state law. 6.2B, no punishment for the commission by any officer of the city of any act declared by this charter to constitute misconduct in office shall exceed the maximum penalty permitted by state law.
That's great to me. That makes a lot of sense.
They're great. I think the or in that second sentence is what's causing all the confusion around the table right now.
Right, and the reference to an ordinance. We're talking about misconduct in office, not an ordinance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or break it up
Yeah.
in comments.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't have to be subs, it's just a space, but now we're talking about misconduct in office before we were talking about ordinance violation.
right.
I search Unicode, I don't see any misconduct in office reference to the ordinances anywhere. I may not find it in a quick search, but
Yeah,
That's I think that's something to write down to bring back to council if we need. If that's something council wants to do right now, there wouldn't be a misdemeanor penalty.
I think that it would be advisable for us to do that. I think we were relying on the charter itself, and frankly, it's never happened. So,
Right.
you know,
Right, we're gonna put that on the whiteboard, so we recommend that, yeah. And send our whole thing over there. And that to them. Okay, so we know we're gonna amend 6.2, a simple thing. And because we're doing that language, will that be a ballot proposal? Will it have to be, even though it's kind of restating the same thing?
Yeah, all of these are required to go before.
So now let's go back to the first one we were talking about, which was 3.4. Yeah, for 3.D4 and then 3.D5. And we're going to enumerate where it's referenced elsewhere in the code.
Your proposal about domestic violence, wouldn't that either be a felony or a misdemeanor? Isn't that already covered?
Domestic violence is a misdemeanor punishable up to 93 days in jail. So it's
Oh, it's
not,
over the 6 months.
it's less than the 6 months.
Oh, okay.
And assault and battery is the same thing. It's
That's
93 days in
got
jail.
it.
yeah, I had a note here, child endangerment. We're not putting that in.
I think child abuse.
Yeah.
Child abuse fourth.
I don't know what it was. That was my note, that you guys had decided to put that.
Child abuse fourth is a 1-year misdemeanor. And I think, I don't know if there's, I don't know a child endangerment criminal statute. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I've never seen it. So. And all forms of child abuse are at least a 6-month misdemeanor.
We're referencing back, we take care of 3.4 by adding D and E. 4.9, we're talking about, we're just going to reference that in 4.DE and not do anything within that of what we've already done with 4.9. We did the investigative report. We had that approved before.
A lot of time on that.
And then 6.2, we just talked about that. And that again would be where we're just going to break it.
12.5, is that?
For section 3.4, the sub 4, what is the language again?
Nation of domestic assault.
Domestic violence or assault and battery.
We've seen that updated. Could be good with that.
It was written up at some point.
It was written up,
Yeah.
but we didn't finalize it. Okay, and so then, let's go back to 12 point, you just said point.
Sorry, I'm circling back. 3.4D3 is kind of where you start the catch-all, and we could just add there you could cross-reference it in 3.4D3 instead of adding a new 5.
Okay, and I know this is on our whiteboard, it's number 1 on our whiteboard, and I have under here in this general position affecting officers that city, the ranked choice voting. Is that the place where we're going to recommend that they put ranked choice, the language in there for ranked choice voting? I was looking at hyperdex, looking at how you elect somebody. Seems like either 2 or 4. Or 3 general provisions. These are duties. Where do we talk about the election? The officers to be elected. So I had the ranked choice voting after 3.1 and before 3.2 is when we first talked about this. Is that the place we put the language that was approved?
Why would it be in 14?
Why would it be what?
Why wouldn't it be in 14 or 11?
Well, because we have general provisions affecting officers in the city. Because
14 makes sense to me.
All right. So can we get that ranked choice voting? We don't have anything in 14 that we're amending at this point. But it seems like we should probably have a rough draft of that included in that one. Well, that was out of order, but my notes had that in that too. So 14 makes more sense because I will be.
So when they put this forward in voters, though,
They call the section.
they call the second.
That's
I was trying to pull up, I thought.
Yeah, thank you.
So I don't think you could probably put it where.
I thought that it was.
Well-
This was.
The section headings in chapter 20 don't mean anything. So it has to be in the charter. And we're the charter amendment, the charter review committee. So we're trying to put it in a place that makes the most sense. That's our recommendation. That would be my understanding.
Plus
Yeah,
the
we can do
people
that.
will vote on it,
Yeah.
they would vote to change it.
Because they might have said it's section 2 and we're renumbering. We've already said we're going to renumber when we put transparency in there. So it wouldn't make any sense to put it in the number they had. It didn't make sense that it went there.
Yes, so as adopted, it was adopted in sections 3.1A and 3.6. Because the ranked choice voting was 3.1, it was the same ballot initiative also had 3.6 filling vacancies, which says if vacancy occurs on the city council, the council shall within 30 days after the vacancy occurs, one person who possesses the qualifications required of council members to serve until the next regularly scheduled city council election, at which time a successor shall be elected to serve the unexpired term. It's only restating state law, but so it did add both of those provisions.
So in light
And so-
of that,
Yes, so what we're doing is recommending move of the location, that can be done, but that's just the process we.
but then that vacancy piece seems to apply more to 3.3 versus chapter 14. So maybe we should just keep it the way it is on the ballot, put it sort of.
You mean the second part of it, the vacancy?
Do you
It is
split it into 2 different chapters or keep it in the same
No.
chapter?
It didn't really make a change.
different spot.
I apologize, just looking at the back of the ballot here. No, so what that is referencing is that the new 3.1A abrogates the filling of vacancies because it would be done by ranked choice voting. So it actually did not amend 3.6. They're referencing that it would be changed if this were adopted. It never was because it's not legal under state law. And so the process hasn't been changed. So we don't need to deal with 3.6, but the section that's been added is 3.5.
My understanding is when that ballot proposal was whatever year it was, that when this goes to council, that allows us to amend it because it's past that time.
It certainly is. Yeah, you certainly have that authority, absolutely.
So I don't, just speaking for the charter review committee, I don't think that we're going to go against the voters, say not to put it in, but council can review our recommendation recommendations and decide what to do based on the current state law. Do we put something in the charter or not? But I feel like you can correct me, you can, say, no, I think we shouldn't put it in, but I feel like we should add it in and leave it to council to decide how they're going to do it based on the state law that's still in place.
I would just say, from my standpoint, I think you have to have it in. Public has voted on it. It doesn't have to be in where the ballot proposal stuck it in, because we're in the process of amending the charter, and it makes more sense for that to be in elections specifically. As far as, I really never read that as abrogating the 30 days to appoint a new member when one resigns or is removed. But that's your interpretation.
Yeah, that's what so when you do a ballot initiative under the Home Rule City Act, your initiative is required to specifically state any provisions you're abrogating. So they pointed that out on their petition. I don't think it does either. Right?
Yeah, okay. All right.
So elections, put it in elections instead of 3. Looking around.
I'm just thinking out loud, but is it possible because it passed the voters, then we send it to city council recommending that because it passed the voters recommended we adopt it, but that this committee notes that in doing that it's in violation of present state law. I know that there's a petition drive, I think, underway that I've heard about recently to get ranked choice voting approved at the state level, but that's not the case. I mean,
It's conditional language.
Yeah, the language
is it the language
language
is conditional?
as adopted on 3.1A starts with, in the event the Michigan Bureau of Elections certifies the process for the use of ranked choice voting beginning in the election of 2023 or such subsequent odd year election, once the conditions of the certified process are satisfied, and then it goes into the actual process. So it does put a conditional. If you wanted to put it in section 3, chapter 14, we have the election procedure in 14.1 that says state law shall apply, et cetera, except as otherwise provided by this charter. 14.2 was repealed, and so that's an open space. It probably makes sense for recommending moving it to 14, put it at 14.2.
Oh, yeah, I have a question. But since this says it's going to 3.1A, that's what was voted on. Isn't that where it should be, should be in the charter now is 3.1A?
It is in the charter now.
It has 3.1A.
Absolutely. Yeah, so,
You can't
so this decision is asking the voters, it would be essentially asking the voters, ranked choice voting was adopted by the voters and so labeled this section 3.1A. The council recommends it be moved to chapter 14. Yeah, it wouldn't change anything about the operative language of it.
This is sort of like what was mentioned earlier about the timely amendment ordinances, the charter amendment. How long is it typically? I think we talked about this before, but why wouldn't this already be in our copy of the charter that we have now? Presented.
Yeah, so I think because of the turnover in the city council or in the clerk's office, rather, with the addition of the election that happened, I think that's the issue. I know when Marie was leaving, she was working on it, and I think it kind of stopped. And so we've had an interim clerk since then. Once they're appointed, that needs to be updated and on the website.
If we're gonna just go to the voters and say we're gonna change what's in the charter, then we're not even meeting.
Not
charter. Yeah, no,
Definitely, I agree on that.
Okay, so you'll work up 14 with that language in there for us at the next meeting then?
Yep, so they'll just be moving that to 14.
Yes.
Last item you added to the whiteboard about the charter amendments, the ordinance. Should also have the charter amendments. And they should be amending the charter.
yeah, it seems like that should
Yeah,
happen.
we're gonna have one, we should have this one. Yeah.
You know, 10 days, it would become an operative, so I don't know, something reasonable.
What are you talking about?
Because it said that you want to ban charter amendments, that if something changes in the charter amendments, we do the ordinance right away. We should also amend the charter by.
And it's more of an administrative thing. I mean, it is effectively by virtue of state law and the voters, like it is absolutely technically amended, but I agree, it's like directing administrative changes consistent with it.
And if we weren't making that recommendation, it'd be one thing, but if we're making.
I mean, I guess in the context of, this one we're talking about now, like, it's not operative right now anyway, so it's not the biggest of deals, but we're recommending making some pretty substantive changes coming up. It would be nice that if those changes were reflected in what people could read within 2 years if the voters passed them.
I would say, within like 90 days or 6 months maximum.
Right.
So
I mean, we're
it
at,
needs to be done almost.
yeah, we're at 18 months now since the one we're discussing was passed, and it still isn't reflected in the Union Code
I
chart.
don't think that's the only one.
Yeah, it's-
Prop ones on.
Well, props, yeah.
Rep one just got
That
elected,
was
yeah,
like-
but we look at it as another issue with an ordinance that we repealed and Unicode doesn't have it caught up yet. The references on to Unicode, that can be a separate issue. They can be very difficult to deal with in recodification, but the charter is up on our website. That's the kind of
Say it, we just approved 7 months ago. Prop one, yeah.
True, and on the website, there are, there's a section to look at ordinances that haven't actually been included in the Unicode. So we do actually, we do have to get those up. It's just that we don't then include them in the.
Okay, so we ready to move on to chapter 17? Nodson, I see a nod. All right, so this is the East Lansing Public Library. And I'm going to talk about some first things that were missed on this. That was partly because we're saying in the air about whether they wanted 5 or not. So the first thing I noticed was on the first page, page 155 and 164 pages of our packet, on 17.1. Okay, so the red part that says 2 members shall be appointed each year, except that every 3rd year, 3 members should be appointed. That should all be eliminated because that was our tentative language if we were expanding if we were going to expand the group, and the library board had recommended to keep it at 5. So you see in the first line, it's related to 5, which is then it's a 5-year term. One is every year.
Can't go back.
Yes. And then the language above that's crossed off, and that should be the one that should be restated. So just got missed. So I just have a question on this. This whole first paragraph refers to when the charter was just adopted and they had library board, they had a library board in place. Do we need to keep that kind of language, or do we just need to update it to be what's going on currently? Because this is the ones that were there, that were hold office at the time of the adoption of this charter. Do we need that whole sentence in there, or should we just say the library board, we're not creating it anymore because it's created? Are you following me on that? So
Yeah, but this isn't that the founding, because we're changing the founding document, we're not really, are we?
that's my question. I'm always going to have us look back and know how these things happen, but in the library board, it sort of says that whole thing is a little confusing to someone who's reading it the first time because they're they're trying to figure out how that relates to the charter. So I don't know how you feel about that, but we should have that discussion because we're all gonna have to defend that person.
So would you recommend that just the first sentence reading, the East Lansing Public Library Board of Trustees shall consist of I, and go from there?
Yeah. That's what I think for simplicity. And then,
So did we just include the resolution? Forming it, that's not in the charter. Right, we've got the resolution.
a resolution.
Okay, so the part of the attachment is the resolution.
Not understand.
But when I look at the attachment for 17, it starts off with the resolution recommending the change. Oh, I'm sorry, so I have that. So then you're saying the change should also include removing they're hereby created.
I mean, why not just say the Lansing Public Library Board of Trustees shall consist of,
Right.
or something like that.
I think that's what.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I just want to clarify, Diane, this sentence that starts in the first instance, strike that whole sentence.
Just that there is hereby
There is
created.
Start with the East Lansing Public. Strike the first part. Because it's already been created, so
Oh,
now the
yeah,
charter
that's-
should read.
But that other sentence reads, in the first instance, the members of the board shall be comprised of the Board of Trustees.
Yeah.
Now trustees in East Lansing Public Library hold office at the time of the adoption of this charter. Why would we retain that language at all?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's what I asked you.
Yeah.
Can you just strike that?
Yeah.
Can you strike that?
Got it. Okay, good.
So it's just going what is current, and that's what the whereas you're right. Just referring to us going forward at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was my first thing, and then on 17.3, that first line shall hold, we talked about this again with council meetings. We talked about schedules versus hold, because we want them to schedule it. If there's not a quorum, they can't hold the meeting. And if they know there's not a quorum, then they don't have the meeting and they postpone it. And that's been the history of that. So 70.3, the first line, Board of Trustees shall schedule at least one regular meeting, second page. Schedule. And then we talked about last meeting. Pam brought up unless covered by the collective bargaining agreement.
There's the change.
But if we're talking about that was in relation to the last sentence, the library director shall oversee the employees of the library.
Right.
If there's a collective bargaining agreement, the library director is in charge of following that. So doesn't that sentence,
But remember, we were replacing they serve at the discretion of. Because they don't serve at the discretion of the director, but they report to the director. Like, the thought was that the contract now articulates serve at the behest of the contract.
yeah, we crossed that.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So we still wanted to identify that the library director was the top executive, library manager, and all the staff.
So we're okay with that. We don't have to have the collective bargaining agreement in there that we talked about, because this language
Right,
as presented.
I
Okay,
expect what I thought.
okay.
Who negotiates that collective bargaining agreement?
The library director.
The library director does it, okay.
And-
Legal counsel.
And then on 17.6, I'm comparing all of our minutes with what was here. On 17.6, we talked about removing the quotes about the library's mission.
I think those are strike, it's just mine is weird.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very good strikeout.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
It's good.
Diane, I'm a little concerned about the scheduling versus the shell hold. Because I totally hear what you're saying. So I also think we can still have meetings without a quorum. We just can't vote on anything. But my concern might be that in some kind of worst case scenario, there's public comment that they want to avoid, so they don't hold meetings. So there's, you know what I mean, that there might be, but it does, as we, for the early ordinance, it doesn't say or what, you know, or if you don't hold them, is there a sanction or something? But I guess I thought, when I read that, it's that there should be a public meeting on a monthly basis that allows for public comment, whatever the, you know.
I was thinking something similarly, that schedule just kind of gave a lot of wiggle room out of it. That I understand isn't the intention of what they were here asking, you know, when they were here asking, like, I understand their concerns about the shall hold. But I also think that if we go too far the other way and just say shall schedule, a not well-meaning library board of trustees could just entirely shirk their duties and say, well, we scheduled all these meetings, we have this 5-year term, and we're just not gonna have anything because they're scheduled, even though we're not holding them.
Right, and I think their concern was timing with the budget. So their concern was trying to get their meeting
I think-
aligned with other events.
I think when they were here, they had a specific concern about that there are some months where they don't have a quorum, and so they can't hold their meeting.
Oh, I thought it was because we were specifying a meeting that was not aligning with the budget reporting or something, but
It always has been, they can get a quorum. If you have this, they shall hold, this is dictating to them that, okay, you don't have a quorum, this, but we gotta get another meeting in here, which date get a quorum, and they have to work through that to get that. That's what this is saying.
and that's what they currently do.
No,
I think that's what they currently did,
no,
based on what we were describing.
if they didn't, you know, August comes and
So they shouldn't.
everybody's on vacation, they say, well, we're not gonna have, we don't have a quorum, or you know, for all the years that I've been there, as their liaison, there would be things where we had 2 attorneys and they were in court, and so we didn't have a quorum because they weren't coming. And so we had to cancel the meeting because we didn't have the quorum for that day. And you can say that we can still hold the meeting, but can't get any business done.
Right, you can't
So if you want them to have a meeting, the hold is that there's a schedule. So, you know,
How about they shall schedule at least one regular meeting for each calendar month and hold at least 10 business meetings during the year.
Or anything like that, that's,
That gives them 2 to
Yeah,
go around with.
But why would you want to do it?
because we're concerned that worst case scenario, we have an avoidant trustees that don't want to see the public in a monthly meeting.
But the answer to that is to provide the same authority to the board that the council has to require a member's presence. And a failure to require apply is removal from office.
Oh, you're thinking
So
it's
if
an
you
individual.
appoint somebody who actually will show up.
I think that that's maybe a bit harsh for a volunteer position. And so,
I don't know, we have that authority under the general provisions of for volunteers.
what happens if we don't show up to this? I'm serious, what would happen? Show
Well,
up,
that's why we have alternates.
right,
no, but I just think we have alternates in case one of us had moved or something. I don't think that there's any provision for removal from a committee unless short of resignation
so
from
our-
our committee.
the alternates were put here because in the past, when Mark was doing this, somebody dropped out midstream.
Right, resignation.
And nobody.
Did they announce it or they didn't just quit showing up? They just said. that
Right,
They
that's-
had a reason.
Yeah.
So then, I was just gonna say, I think hold is the better word than to keep in there, and I think what it does is it sends a message to them that we have to have a meeting, and if you all can't make it, which often happens, that they say, I know I'm not gonna be here, then they try to adjust another meeting date and then post it, so, I think that's a nice enough directive without being.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Diane. I do think people get on committees and then they can't do the time.
Well,
And
we had
that's
that, the
why-
library board, and
Yeah.
that person.
Diane, does the board, current board, consider itself subject to the legal?
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't say anything about that.
Well, that's a good point. I just assumed.
Well, isn't a recommission
It's just,
subject?
I think every, it's not created by the city council, so.
So this is a charter,
Yeah.
this board has its own authority under the charter.
Does, yes. So the question about having open meetings, so the open meetings act's already,
Nothing in the charter about council being subject to the Open Meetings Act. I think it's just assumed that all city bodies have to call
The
the state law.
statute, specifically applies to the city councils. I mean, it mentions.
The library board that we've established is created by public act as well, which allows us to levy the 1 mil. And so under that act, they are a public official or they're a public
Yeah,
body,
taxing.
so they're covered by that.
Public body, right?
Yeah.
The local legislative governing body, board, commission, subcommittee, or your council.
Yeah, and even if you went back to, even if it wasn't covered by state law, if you look at the definition under the Open Meetings Act, the fact that this board has the authority to hire employees to approve their own budget, pay bills, that kind of thing, they clearly have the type of authority that's policy in nature, and so they'd be covered under that general definition.
Yeah, that also says that it's powered by the charter. Is that powered by the charter?
okay, so with that, their meeting is coming up before our next meeting, so I want to get something to them. And so can you rework that and get that to them, and based on what we have done? Obviously, it'll be a tentative draft, maybe label it that way. So that they can respond to it and have that first paragraph be done.
What input they have in their hour, that wording.
So the resolution that created our committee says, it shall establish dates on which it shall host less than a certain number of meetings. Kind of interesting.
I think that host was specifically the public meeting.
Yeah.
Right? Like our 6 public meetings.
Right, you go on your calendar.
Yeah.
Actually, public hearing. Like the public hearings, right? Yeah.
Okay, so we're not finalizing this. We're going to get a rough draft so that you can send it to the library board between our meetings here, and then we'll get input back from them. And will you follow up, Mr. King?
They asked to go up to 7 indemnification.
No, they
No,
don't.
you tell me.
They didn't ask. Well, I thought when they spoke,
They thought maybe they, right.
oh, I thought they asked that.
One other question. Language regarding the city facilities. City library facilities are or shall be owned by or operated by the city. The board controls them. Does the board, because we now have a village that supports the board, have the authority to purchase its own facilities? As we do.
Yeah, they do.
But their budget goes in front of the council.
Their budget does, their
This charter.
allotment or like an allocation
Their
to
general
them
fund amount.
was, but then they adopt their own budget.
But it does go in front of them. Their budget goes in front of the council.
We look at the budget, but I'm not even sure, how much control we have with that now that they have their own village. So,
But I,
we include it in our budget, obviously.
but doesn't council have the authority to levy up to what the voters have approved? But they don't have to levy the full amount.
That piece is at the discretion of the vote of the city council.
Right, so that's where the council controls, like what you're seeing, you could reduce the village levy.
But we have already authorized 2 mil, so.
But
We've
you-
already done that.
But if they presented you with a budget that was
Every
unattractive,
year you appropriate those mills. So every year you get to adjust based on their budget.
Okay. But my general question is, do they have the authority to purchase their own property?
Yeah, under that Public Library Act, my recollection that they do, in other communities that I have, where it's in a city-owned facility, they pay rent.
Okay, do we need to put anything that somehow restricts that?
I don't think we could restrict that state law that right because it is a state law, right? There's a couple different public acts that you can establish the public library under. Ours, we did, presumably it's, it was done a long time ago, but it's under that particular act, you can levy the mills and go to the voters every 10 years. But that's what grants them that authority, so I don't think we can restrict it.
But the property is owned by the city, right?
It is now. The question is, could you go out and buy a
Could they?
building?
Yeah, well, it's
So,
so,
I mean, if the council has their actual purse strings and the council didn't want that to happen, they could cut their, that's what I'm hearing.
We could also authorize it to have. Couldn't be a city-owned building.
So you could let them do it or you could stop them from doing it.
I don't think that anyone sophisticated enough in the library board of trustees to ever consider going in that
Or if
direction.
anybody is gonna donate $10 million for a new building.
Should we reference, should we reference the act under which the library was created, this sort of hybrid thing in the city charter though, so that there is some more, so that anybody who is looking might know that this is how this library is governed?
Or give you my endowment. But no, but
No,
seriously, yeah.
I mean, so that people understand how the millage fit, and if anybody's looking, because it's a quirky hybrid. It's not a city department.
The other mill come from? You guys just give one of yours or
No, the state law gives other.
it's a mill and then we addressed another?
And
Okay.
then
Okay.
others, okay.
Oh, okay.
Going forward, it would be helpful. If we ask for another mill sometime in the future, someone could reference it.
I think that sometimes when we're doing these millage requests for the library, people think that the library's budget comes from the city. And so you're engaging with the citizens of the community about, well, wait a minute, are we being taxed enough for this? And I think if we can, say, look, you'll see if you go to the charter that there's, we have that somebody trying to seek a millage has a backup, and this is what we have. It's not a separate department. It's doing something that's jointly funded.
Okay, so I totally agree with that. So let's take it even down the line at the next 10-year renewal. If it's rejected, we would want to change the charter then to reflect this, correct? We wouldn't, if we put, because we have the millage in here as a reference, and then we add where the funding is coming from. If the voters rejected it, then definitely we'd have to change on the charter. We have to change the charter language because it would say where it's funded from. So where would you suggest we put this strict cover?
If we're going to reference the public act, and I think it should honestly be like.
Yeah. So first sentence 17.1 first.
Yeah, I say maybe we should add a
And then
sentence that
everything else
says
is renumbered.
the East Lansing. Well, I mean, I think we could just have it as the first sentence of 17.1 to say the East Lansing Public Library was founded pursuant to Michigan Public Act. I can't remember.
Why don't you take one, facility too, or something that,
Right here, the policy resolution to East Lansing Public Library.
So do we want to put that in all drafted first sentence for 17.1?
Could we do 17.1, just call it East Lansing Public Library, and then, put that reference language in there, and the board would be 17.1A or something,
17.2.
or 17.2.
think,
We
I think
can renumber
right, we have to
everything.
renumber everything if we went to 17.2, whereas if we made it 17.1A, it's just an easy fix.
But we could also just say
So every part is
hereby created under these two
Yeah.
resolutions, whatever they are, East Lansing Public Library, blah, blah, blah. So we could just, the hereby created could turn into created by the ordinances or what are they?
So
Or operate, so
Or, yeah.
So would we also include the millage piece into that first sentence and it is funded by the,
I think that would be a good place to put it. And then if at some point it turns out that there's no millage allocation or the voters, don't reauthorize the millage, then, that's the place we'll change the wording or.
But it wouldn't change the budget wording. Budget would be tiny, but it would still be going in front of council, and there's no reason why any of that would.
I think you could grab some language that mentioned that that's how it's funded now. And indicate if that changes, you can do it with fewer words than I just spoke, but if that changes, that it would be subject to the general fund of the city.
No, don't say that. We'll have to close. We're gonna get, what's there.
I know.
No, I do too. So that's, don't just say, oh, I'll just get money somewhere else. No.
It's only the 30-year millage.
Yeah.
That's so,
somebody's trying to.
what I'm thinking is that we just change the title of 17.1 to East Lansing Public Library and Board. And then A would be the first sentence that says the public library is established pursuant to Act 164 of 1974, and then the remainder would be B. Is that what I'm understanding?
I'd rather have 17.1 just be the public act.
And gotcha.
Because everything else is, all these 17.2, 3 is all related to the board. I mean,
Yes, that's right. They're boards.
I don't know if it makes sense for
No,
you
what
to
I'm
say
saying
for East Lansing.
No, so then we'll renumber the rest. Okay.
But what about adding something about funded by a village?
In that 17.1, yeah. East Lansing Public Library. And you have the Public Library Act and then you got,
It may be funded by the millage. under
No,
that
it's
act.
currently funded by, or
Well, it's funded by both the city and the mill.
Right.
so
And,
something like that.
but I mean, currently isn't the word the charter house, because currently,
It is, and if we have to, if it is no longer, then we'll have to change it.
I don't,
It's going to be funded by 1 mil no matter what. And then there's the additional 1 mil. So I think we can just say it's funded by a millage. Whether it's 1 mil or 2 mil.
Because if you just say it's funded by millage, that imply 100% village.
that's what it is.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so the 1 mil and then the other mil, they're both mills.
Jill, how is this concise? All right, we're okay with that. If you wouldn't mind, you're gonna send that draft. Would you send it to all of us, just so that we know that that's what's going to the library board? In case somebody on the board asks us the question, we'll know what they're looking at.
okay, sure.
Thanks. All right, then we go on to 18. This one might be easy to get through, maybe.
It would be easier if you had something to drink.
It does say in the resolution, that's chapter
So
7.
that needs to be amended to 18. Sure.
Isn't it already sort of, it's just the way it is, that the city would have to, for anyone, even in the city, would have to abide by the Michigan liquor code? I just wonder if this chapter,
Or added that we will have no more liquor licenses issued.
why would you do that?
Because I don't want any more liquor licenses issued in the city of Lansing. That's why. We don't want to pay the public service dollars that each liquor license costs us. Wait till we have all the incidents with the super stuff up on the corner, having said, that's a lot of liquor.
Well, but that's like, it just already is that, is all I'm saying, it's just, we're already subject to that state statute, so.
Do we need to articulate it? Is that-
Just a question before you guys are bringing up is whether we modify it to what's written here, minimizing it to referencing the city shall abide by the MLCC, or whether we rescind chapter 18 altogether. Because it's obvious. that-
Yeah, I think it's a vote, I might want to be,
There's some
but it's free for all. It's, but that we're not just saying no liquor rules, we're saying going to stay. I mean, right, as a voter, but
Yeah, I can't say that we're recommending on the ballot, but we get rid of the chapter code. I just don't think that we want to do this.
We're showing everything.
And, yeah, I mean, Jack, I think as a lawyer, you understand it's the same, but those are certain.
Yeah, I just don't feel it necessary, so
It's not.
no, it's not necessary, but we're looking at things. About the voter, so let's vote it. But they,
you can see it as archaic eventually. Plus our things for sure.
Okay, so we would, if we're okay with this language, with that amendment in the resolution by chapter 18. Someone want to make a motion to approve this?
I'll make a motion with the amendment that, yeah, that it reflects chapter 18 and title, the resolution to recommend changes to chapter 18 of the East Lansing City Charter, but otherwise adopt this. Well,
There's a second. Moved by Foreman, seconded by Wilkerson Johnson to approve chapter 18 as presented.
I have a discussion question, so just for Tony, really. What other charters, we'll call them modern charters, that they address? Like compared to the other CDC,
Typically, alcohol isn't addressed.
it's just not addressed. Hold on, go ahead, answer your questions. When we do cite a statute like this, that, I know we do this like the Open Meetings Act, FOIA and stuff, which probably will continue to exist, probably the MLCC, but never, this does not make sense to cite the statute because it just, statute can change, the title can change, citation can change, everything, it's just likely like 10 years from now, 20 years from now. It's probably gonna be the same statute, so.
The LCC will probably be there, and I mean, but that's probably, you know, the cannabis regulatory agency has been named 3 or 4 different things in the past 5 years. But I think it's a lot of charters do have references to the applicable state law. I think Jill's point is well taken, though, that it might be hard to get the voters to adopt the change if we just say we're eliminating chapter 18 alcoholic beverages, because it sounds like there's no regulation, but that's purely from a voter perspective. Yeah, you know, like, and obviously a policy decision on behalf of you guys.
Do we limit ourselves, my last one, are there any other laws besides the MLCC that would deal with alcoholic beverages that either should be cited or are we limiting, or do we think, are we limit ourselves in a good way or bad way by just citing that? So governing.
No, because I don't think that the way that it's referenced doesn't say shall only or shall be limited to alcoholic beverage sales as set, or limitations set forth in the MLCC. And we do have certain provisions regarding liquor licenses in our zoning code, for example. And so, but I don't think we need to cite those. This just references. We will comply with the state.
We just say that, you know, as outlined in Michigan liquor law, period, and not cite it, and if it changes, so we don't have to worry about it.
Under, you could just say under state law.
Right.
Or that's broad. No.
Earlier to in this policy.
the city of Lansing City Council is voting to not allow a liquor license transfer for the Rite Aids, whatever. Is that a state law that allows an elected body to, like, where does the state law come in terms of controlling the issues of liquor licenses? They have to be approved by local government.
I mean, it depends on the type. So that's an SDD or an SDM, which are a type of liquor license that's just for off-site consumption. And I did read about that, and I think that is questionable as to the authority of Lansing City Council, honestly, because I do think MLCC has preempted the ability to control issuance of SDM and SDD. They have a lot of control over on-site consumption licenses, which are
Well, this is specifically about the Rite Aid conversion.
I withdraw my motion. And I'm calling, I mean, it
Well,
seems.
it's already, so you have to move to reconsider.
Have we voted on everything.
No one's made a,
Oh, no, we're discussing, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You're right.
so, I mean, it seems we're far afield from, but maybe not ready to vote on this today.
Right, they're talking about it like they did not, like, further reasons.
There was a motion.
There is a
and a
motion.
second.
Support, but we're discussing.
gotcha.
Why do you think we're not ready to vote?
Oh, it just seems like there's a lot of questions about what the proper language should be.
Well, I'm just not sure that we want to put an actual law in here that
Right.
we
Yeah,
change.
Right.
That's my only issue.
Yeah.
Maybe put a period after code or something. That's my only issue, because if that law changes tomorrow, we'd have to amend
Because
it.
they
That's-
come to like the regulation of alcoholic beverages. City shall abide by the regulation, I don't know, something like. Pursue the state law or something.
Yeah, I think people are gonna want to see. a little more regulation.
Same thing.
No, it's, we need to be dry. We're at the whole other side of the spectrum now.
So we're gonna, if you just put a period after code, which is what Jill's suggesting, and you want to make something about how we're issuing liquor licenses and stuff like that.
No, I'm just hypothesizing that,
I understand, like, the council has the ability to restrict in certain areas, we don't have this many liquor licenses. That isn't controlled by the state. You can say, we're only gonna have this many here, where,
that's zoning.
you can have it as they have to have a special use permit, so you can write in there the areas where these can be allowed. You can, like the DDA has the ability to give extra, up to a certain number of liquor licenses. And, so you have
That's
the power in the city council, yeah, under the ordinances, and under DDA
So maybe-
control.
Maybe
So,
we want to reference, shall abide by the laws as outlined in the Michigan Liquor Control Code and subsequent ordinances of the city or something.
Okay.
I think the simplicity is best,
I think,
period.
my view is, I think it's more likely that the short title of the law changes than the statute changes. So I think if we're talking, yeah, I think it's more likely that the Michigan Liquor Control Code is going to be renamed into something else than MCL 436.1101 will be, or become something else.
They don't keep.
No, they would keep the MCL, they would not keep the title of the law.
Okay, so maybe lose the
Just refer to
two.
state law.
Yeah.
the code,
So I mean, would we look at amending it, city shall abide by the laws of
Of the state of
the
Michigan.
state of Michigan regarding alcoholic beverages?
that's
Required to regardless.
Yeah.
I think the people in East Lansing is sophisticated enough, we shouldn't be too worried to just say to them like something is outdated, that's what it is. Said about that.
Then they'll say no and we'll just keep our,
Yeah.
our tavern version, it doesn't do anything anyway.
yeah,
This is an improvement we have here over the whole version, but
I think,
yeah.
I think you have to put something in there if you're getting rid of all this. And then the next time around with the charter commission and they say this, do we really need it? They might drop it, but you're asking them to drop.
Lot. Yeah, what about a reference to other ordinances as passed by the city? So the state law as well as city ordinance or something. So we're doing. Right, is that, because we're saying we have special use permits, we're saying we have ordinances that control.
I mean, everything the city does for ordinances also pursuant to the Michigan Liquor Control Code. So I think
Right,
that's
we're talking about the
significantly
alcoholic-
overly complicating things.
We're talking about the alcoholic beverages, how they're referenced in the city charter. And we're talking about eliminating any reference to alcoholic beverages in the city charter. So we can say we're voting to remove every reference to alcoholic beverage sales in the charter.
Well, I think we should say the city shall permit alcoholic beverages consistent with state.
And local ordinance.
That, and local ordinance.
I'd like to see
I'd like to
as a voter.
show that we're allowing it instead of trying to go the opposite of becoming dry.
Well, we're not gonna become dry, but I can tell you, voters are not thrilled by the amount of alcohol consumed in East Lansing, like that is, well, the cost of public safety and the cost of the alcohol consumption in East Lansing. And the people that vote are homeowners and they don't party as hard as we used to. And we do want to hear that we're doing something to control alcohol consumption. I'm just.
But I mean, from my own observation, the student population
Doesn't
doesn't
vote.
drink like the
They don't.
prior to COVID population. They're,
They don't vote.
they're leaving hard by midnight.
Right,
They're
they're
used
not,
to staying there.
right, well, and they're not East Lansing residents.
I
but that's-
live downtown, and tell you, it's gotten calm, more calm every
Right.
year
Yeah.
for the last, especially the last few years. But you get rid of loud music outside.
All right, so I heard that Jonathan would like to withdraw his motion. Is that okay with the second?
Yes,
And would you like to make a new motion so that we have something? I don't think we can discuss this again at the next meeting, get any further than what we can get tonight.
Can you repeat your language?
I put the city shall permit alcoholic beverages consistent with state law and local ordinances.
That's enough then.
I would motion to adopt that striking and local.
Why?
I said,
Why do you want to strike local ordinances?
Because it doesn't,
Shall permit
it's redundant.
alcoholic beverages.
so that we will follow state ordinances.
There should be a law.
Yeah. I said and ordinances, but.
And you don't want an ordinance, so you're just, the city shall permit alcoholic beverages consistent with state law. You want to say Michigan state law?
Yes, but
Charter shall. be-
yeah, I mean, I guess we can Nevada state law, like, but
well, to make it consistent with the rest of the charter, we reference it, if we have exact language we use. Says like pursuant to state law or something like that, other.
Well, we just do that in the library section, we'll call it out specifically.
You're doing it in the next section, we're talking about the section two.
Right, Jonathan, it's your motion. So what do you want? Do you want to have the, want to call up the act or not?
it's a pretty simple thing. I think we should call it the act, and I'm also open to whatever the committee decides on. So I guess first could we vote on,
You gotta get a second.
so, okay, yeah, so first I would, I guess, well, I guess my motion's already on the floor.
I second.
Yeah.
The original language.
Which is the city shall permit alcoholic beverages consistent with Michigan state law.
Right.
All right. Any amendments or discussion? Is there any amendments or not? I know Robert's rules, so is there any amendments? If there not, we're gonna vote on this. Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
So that motion passed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 to 1.
They're talking.
Okay. All right, now we're going to chapter 19. The liability, we have a simple language simplified in all of this. Does anyone want to make a motion? We do cite the code.
The heading needs to be amended from 17 to 19.
Okay, at the top,
Did we make that change in the last one too? Correct.
I'd move to approve the, proposed change, recommended change to chapter 19. East Lansing City Charter.
I'll second.
Discussion liability.
What's gonna be our marketing on this, just to make it,
But we're discussing.
bring it up into current times, or?
It's just new state law. Yeah, that's what it's.
simplify it to state law governs.
Yeah.
Liability.
There's a lot to get rid of.
Didn't East Lansing so that we're following the state?
Yeah, let's do a lot of that.
I don't know.
I don't consider being very diligent about making sure that it was crystal clear that we're following state law, but what were we doing before? What I want, I'm just kind of.
Do you remember how you had this discussion when you put all this in for investment?
Yeah, we really were relying on the governmental tort liability here. And the requirement for a notice really comes from that. And, so this is the language that we put together just simply to make sure everybody knew that notice is required. You know, it is probably true that nobody who has ever been under any circumstances has ever met each other. So it's not the best place to have it, but every attorney should be looking at this and the person representing it. So I have no problem with this language. But if people feel that it's surplusage or just make reference back to the act itself, I mean, I'm okay with that too. That unless Tony seems to feel that it's not the appropriate way for us to see, the act is out there. There are a bazillion cases that are reported on it. So the law is pretty well known at this point in time among lawyers who actually do this type.
I think it's important to have something in here like this that it references back to something that's governing versus the city making rules. Because every time somebody had something, they would say, no, the government's immune to that. Well, you just made that rule. No, the state made that rule. To have that in the charter is a cornerstone. I think it's really important. I think 19.3 is absolutely important too, because that has happened in the past where someone says, well, you know, oh, they'll fix that for you, and they have the right to say that. And that really protects the employees of the city from an employee referring that to out of good intentions. For sure.
Yeah, and in that respect, that is the one piece of this, the only piece of this that does go beyond the confines of the GTLA. I do think that's important to address that meeting.
My discussion, so right, for 19.1 and 19.2, it's another thing necessary we have. For they got an injury or something to the state law for making a claim against the government or circumstances. Engage them or address that in the charter.
I can't say that I have any recollection of another charter that specifically references the GTLA. This is detailed. Yeah, it's accurate. But I mean, without 19.1 and 19.2, GTLA would still cover everything the same as it is state law.
But it's another way of notifying. You know,
Yeah, where to go.
these detail, this is the detail of it.
If they did look through the charter and they couldn't find anything, they could absolutely miss the notice provisions of the GTLA, which are extremely strict. Some of them as low as 60 days. And so it may guide them in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, if I were a lawyer working on something like this, and I saw this big block of text in the charter, I'd be looking at the figure and then figuring out is anything different. And then I assume the answer would be no, and I would say, well, why is all this here? And I think that this is, so I think that's why I'm going to be supporting the motion to pass these.
I have a general question, probably should have a year ago. But how is this gonna be, for lack of a better word, marketed? Is the city council gonna do the discussion? Do we think our group's gonna do the discussion? How, yeah.
One thing I would say is remember, like, this is all very detailed. Each one of these sections, not chapters, but each section will be presented to the voters in an amount not to exceed 100 words. So they won't see this. They will see the city, for example, this is totally not what it's specific, but what I've done in other communities is the city charter currently references notice for claims against the city that are inconsistent with state law. This amendment would make it consistent with state law governing notice.
Just remember too, we're just recommending this to the council.
I
The
understand.
council will decide whether they want to put any
Right.
forward.
I was just gonna say, first of all, it will come to council as a recommendation. There will be a public hearing on each one of these recommendations, and there will be the opportunity for the rest of the public to comment on them. Then council will presumably pass the the proposal, place it on a specific ballot, most likely. I'm trying to remember, exactly how we did it last time, but I'm thinking that we still had a primary at the time, a city council primary. So we put it on primary dates and on the general election because there were 43 of them and it took us 2 years to get it done. Because we didn't want to overwhelm the ballots either with, some long thing that nobody will pay any attention to because they've already voted for what they wanted and they don't want to bother with the rest of the ballot. So all those will be considerations, but you're looking at something that you all have worked almost a year on. And we're probably going to see the last of this in maybe 2 more years of voting before it's completed. But we will do the advertising on each one of the ballots that will have items on it, and we'll probably cluster them so that it kind of makes sense to make those changes all together, in one ballot.
There won't be community meetings or any of that stuff to explain them away or any of that.
There will be, if somebody comes to the microphone and says, you have no clue as to what you're talking about, can you come to our neighborhood association?
Okay, got it.
Okay, I don't think that would be a bad idea to have some sort of, but I think that's really worked out nicely with the small tables like we did with the deer call, where you can have people just come in and chat kind of, anyway, I don't think that would be a bad idea, but we're
Well,
seeing.
plus
The other thing is.
we had a town hall the other day, maybe that's one of the ways that we should do it. Maybe
Yeah.
We will have to have, I think, a public hearing at each one of these at the council meeting, but that doesn't prevent us from having in the executive conference room or some other place, a public meeting where we just invite the whole public in and we're going to talk about what happened. At which case it makes sense to me to have you all there as a resource, so you can talk about the conversation that took place that led to.
Right, and that structure we've been doing with the small tables, or where people just, it's not like a podium and somebody speaking, but you can talk about that, I think that'd be a great idea. I'd help staff. Okay, all right.
I also think you have the ability to use the TV channel to go over those things and just running. People can see that versus having to come to a place that. Okay, so you just said something that kind of scared me a little bit here. So on chapter 19, there's two things that are amendment to 19.1 and 19.2. Is that 2 separate ballot proposals or is it the same?
To
The library would be like 7 proposals versus this chapter will be amended to include the.
So they don't take the whole thing down, they object.
Okay, so right up to now, just for your FYI, Grace is gonna help, is gonna do the beginning of this. I'm gonna help her with, Asia made this chart before about what we had approved and we're both keeping a running total and we're at the same point. We've approved 19 so far, different things. And now we're on these last ones here, and the library will be like 6 or 7. And this would, chapter 18 would be 1, and 19 would be 2. So let's say 7, 8, 9, and then we'll see about 20. So we will probably be at this point up to today. We had 19, and then we did some stuff today with the 3.4 that we're working on. So that will be some more. So we're going to get close to 35. I think we're going to
Last time.
so can you run the motion by me again? What did you just decide to?
On Jeff's motion on 19.
The motion to approve the recommended changes, chapter 19.
Which would be what?
Elimination of everything, just reference to the.
It's, the agenda, it's page 160 and 161.
So 1 and 2, but not 3.
right.
Correct.
And the Just, first of all, I'm just, if I can make a comment on this, the 19.1, 19.2 ended up being, legally, even if somebody, decided they were reading this to see what they could do, they're, such, we use such a lot, it's basically legal. I don't think it would be harmful to say in chapter 19 that with regard to these items that were identified previously, contractor negligence, street defects or building defects, that the city is governed by that statute, and so are the claimants. Doesn't have to be any more detailed than that, but that binds us to whatever the state law is, which I think is a good thing to tell people, but binds them as well.
And it makes it sound balanced. It's
Right.
not just about the sewer.
So council will, be the one that determines what that ballot language is, not us.
And then, so one thing on 19.3, the rule there that was established by the courts is basically, if you're dealing with a governmental official and they tell you something, you have the duty of proving they had actual authority. And it seems like if we're keeping this, we should make that clear, that the duty is on the person making the claim on this, that they have, that the city official or whoever would have actual authority to bind.
Isn't that inferred right there?
Well, I'm not real keen on inference when we're talking about people's rights, so.
So part of the last line there, when it says, no officer, agent, or employee of the city shall have the authority to bind the city by any contract expressed or implied without the prior approval of city council, except as otherwise expressly prevented by the charter. Is that not clear enough that they have to have authority from city council or
Maybe
the
so.
charter?
You still have to prove that you had provided that authority.
I think if I'm the judge reading that language, I know that prior approval of city council or otherwise expressly permitted by this charter puts the burden on the plaintiff of proving that. But I think the language is.
But aren't you saying,
There.
but maybe we could get rid of any such representation shall be void of and no effect against, maybe we can get rid of some of
I
that.
think again, the danger zone. I think the language as it is right now makes it very clear that it protects the city.
How does that expand the protection beyond no officer and agent has the authority to bind the city? How does that previous fancy language, how does that say something more than that last
It's
sentence?
sometimes good to say things twice just to get it.
Sometimes it's intentionally convoluting when it's the redundancy.
I think it's well written as.
No such representation shall be void and of no effect as against the city.
Okay, so I'm gonna go to Robert's rules. Does someone want to amend the motion that's on the floor? Seconded by Foreman to keep the language as proposed with the red changes in chapter 19.
I think it's motion on the floor.
Yeah.
Okay, there's
Yeah,
just one thing.
Well, we're talking about whether we want to insert that, so.
That would be the amendment.
Yeah.
No,
Oh, I see.
The
Just
The
trying to move
language
us
that-
along here. If you
the
want
language that
something
was
different, you
referenced-
gotta move it.
talks about the authority to bind the city by. It doesn't talk about it. And there are other things, there are a lot of other things that, you may have somebody come and talk to you about, and you say, oh yeah, you can do that, or we will do that. That's the type of thing that we're trying to avoid by making reference to
Right, making clear,
actual authority.
making clear that no city staff express or implied without prior approval, so, but.
Yeah, because the second sentence seems like an exception to the first sentence, the way it's worded.
That's why I don't like that person.
I don't know.
That's why, do you want to amend it or not? And put it
No, I
on the
don't.
floor, or otherwise we're going to
We'll
vote on
look
the
at it
motion
there.
as it is.
Yeah, we could always do 19.3 separate if someone's.
Everybody is moving that, so. Call for the vote. All those in favor of amending chapter 19, with the two red changes to chapter? Signify by saying yes. Aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, chapter 19 revisions are,
To go back to your question, Van, so the section of the Home Rule City Act is section 21 sub 3, which references a proposed charter amendment shall be confined to one subject. If the subject of a charter amendment includes more than one related proposition, each proposition shall be separately stated to afford an opportunity for an elector to vote for or against each proposition. And so that's got some kind of vague words in it, one subject, more than one related proposition. And George Elworth, the Attorney General on this, retired yesterday. And so, or his retirement party was yesterday. And so he has read this very strictly. Kathleen Markman is taking over that role, and I don't know how she might change that. Obviously, I think 17, all of those changes are, or both of those changes are one subject, and I try to push it through the AG's office for approval that way. But they'll review it under that.
Really, just to be clear here, so maybe not everybody doesn't get this one, the council sends this off for a change. You have to get approval from the AG and the governor's office, right?
Well, it's yes, technically, but council will pass the language as well as the ballot language that references it. The next step is we send it to the governor, who sends it to the AG. The AG sends back a recommendation, and then the governor responds. If the governor rejects it for clarity, whatever it might be, the council still has the authority by a supermajority to put it on the ballot.
And we did that last.
Oh, wait.
We had a couple of items that got the thumbs down. We would have had those.
But it's the voter initiated proposal, so, that the governor doesn't like it.
It's strange because it's obligated to go through the exact same process of transmission to the governor and to the AG. AG makes a recommendation, the governor issues an opinion, I guess, but it is non-binding in any way, and it goes on the ballot.
So what's super majority of city council like? Votes,
in their charter review process, it talks about going to this, did this at the first meeting, so it's on the website that way, so we're good. No, I just, I don't want to keep talking about the same thing. Sorry. Okay, chapter 20.
I'm not for that one. That's fine.
So chapter 20. Oh, we don't have, I'm sorry. We don't have chapter 20 here until the very end. Chapter 8 is the next one. Our favorite chapter, transparency. Yeah, that's exactly right. So, okay. Go to that. So we have this, proposals. We have a couple different ones that were in our packet. And I guess I would just try and figure out which way you want to start this discussion. So we want to do proposal A or proposal B and work off that. Want to make a proposal on this?
Want to pick our favorite to discuss and then go from there?
Yes,
Favorite.
yes. Yes.
Become Jill's.
Would be proposal B, no longer
that's
with name and title.
Okay, so that's B.
last page of that.
63 shows one proposal, 164 is linked on the cities. The 164 has content on it.
For this packet, there's only one version included. It's an updated one that ended. I think it's the base of B with some A pulled in. There's only one in this.
The other version's on page 30.
It's in the written communications.
Okay, so we have, let's do page 163, that's on there. And I'll just propose, we start with that. And since none of you had said anything off of that, we'll start with that and then have the other one next to it and see if you want to take anything from that one and add it to this one, or you feel, as we talked about, whether this is one of those things that's a recommendation for an ordinance for how the FOIA should work. And we send that up with our charter amendments that we have this proposed ordinance with these things that have been outlined in A with more specific language. Yay, nay?
Diane, my concern about the language in the version on 163,
Okay.
which is B, which is version B, the briefer of the two. I'm concerned with the use of the word public records. The policy of the city that all public records be provided in a timely manner, and it's because public records can be read pretty awfully, is a very broad and all-encompassing term. And there are records that are public records that cannot be disclosed under state law, like personnel records. So I'm concerned that the committee would adopt language trying to broadly, in the interest of transparency, use language that is overly broad in this context. And I'm not sure how we can, perhaps Tony can suggest a way we might get around that. But I don't want to put the city in a position where it's got to defend its decision not to disclose records that would be barred from disclosure under state law.
So you're leaning more towards not putting the red thing and leaving more that information, not all information, maybe. The way it was originally written, it is the policy of the city that information will be provided in a timely and accordant, and then goes on and in accordance with the FOIA and in accordance with city's ordinance. Is that where you're going with this?
I would lean towards favoring that language rather than using a term that that might have different interpretations by attorneys and by lay people.
It does have a definition.
Yeah,
FOIA.
it's public records.
I know it has a definition in FOIA, but there's also exclusions in FOIA, but I'm not.
Should we say non-confidential public record?
Says in accordance.
Yeah, I mean, to Lynn's concerned of it, the only thing, so we say and in accordance with FOIA, it could be in subject to FOIA to make that clear. I mean, because my concern on this has always been in it, but I think that's what this language was trying to do, was to ensure it was wrapping in FOIA to bring in the section 13 exemptions, because that's where that's where you're saying we don't want to
Right.
An exception.
waive any exceptions that are in FOIA.
Correct.
And the FOIA then loops in by catch-all, all other exceptions in other state and federal laws.
Right.
So what would the proposed language be there?
I think it's good as is.
I think it does. I think it accomplishes that.
I think public records is not, by definition, public means not confidential. FOIA.
And then changing in accordance subject to,
It's says in accordance also with the city's standards. That's strange.
Yeah, that language.
I can change.
What's the city's ordinance?
That's what it's, what is it? I don't know. That's what I'm saying. So one ordinance is probably. Yeah, it should be plural. There's several ordinances or something. Information that maybe the in accordance could be different. I don't know. I don't forget.
About consistent with, it's a policy of the city that all public records will be provided in a timely, low-cost manner consistent with the state of Michigan's Freedom of Information Act.
I think I would add, or any other applicable state or federal.
I don't object to that.
I think if, there might be some case law, I mean, I'm sure we've got an accountant's section. It's confidential, but that really originated in common law. So there's case law that's out there.
Publishing.
It is the policy of the city that all public records will be provided in a timely, low-cost manner consistent with the state of Michigan's Freedom of Information Act and state and federal and other applicable state and federal laws.
The city does have the FOIA policy. Though.
We have a administrative order,
Okay,
and that governs the internal operations, operation of FOIA requests.
so should be some language there referencing the city's ordinances or orders or policies or something.
City council shall provide for a policy or order to,
Oh, that would be
to swiftly,
That's a FOIA requirement. So
Right, and that's kind of
that's already
A4.
those.
Right, it's A4, it's A4.
Timing, the calculations, form of appeal, all of that's done in the state law.
Oh, no, that's a cost, but
But the city had its own thing that was not necessarily following state law. That's what the council did. Put that order.
And that's all in A4, I think, to be talking about.
So just on this, city council could adopt an ordinance to say, FOIA is free.
Right, that,
Yeah,
we
that's.
got that down to C, yeah.
But I mean, transparency. Does it say how?
Because they may provide guidances for instances where a cost should be waived in or reduced.
Right, the operations are all in A1. But that doesn't address if some ordinance comes down.
So going back to what Lynn was saying, is a policy of the city that all public records will be provided in a low-cost manner consistent with the state of Michigan's Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, and other applicable state and federal laws, period. Or are we adding and subject to city ordinances? Are we adding that or are we leaving that language off?
I don't think you keep that.
I think it confuses things.
Okay, right, so that's what your proposal is for that. Okay, and discuss that. Is that something everyone can live with or not?
As far as me,
Legally, you're fine with that. Okay. All right, let's move on to 8.2.
The only reason why I put policy ordinance in there is that, again, going to this idea of greater transparency than what's put in the FOIA. Council could elect to do. But if you don't have it there, does that conflict with the charter?
If they add additional ordinance, then
Right, if they adopt an ordinance.
You could say something like, whereas otherwise provided by. City, ordinance or.
Well, I don't think, but my position would be, we don't need to make that reference because everything we do, even if we pass an ordinance, we have to
going to be
consistent with the laws that we've identified right there.
You're consistent, you can be more lenient than the
That's
law
consistent
requires.
because it gives us the authority. I mean,
Does the
our
law
action is-
allow you to be more, permit? Does it say you can?
So you're saying if it says you should charge 10 cents a page, does that limit the city council from saying, let's do 5 cents a
Right.
page? No, I don't think, but that would still be consistent with state law. Right, which doesn't, it limits us on the top end, but not on the bottom.
All right, let's try to 8.2 then.
I've got a comment on 8.2. So as we're discussing the library, we're assuming that city council, board and commission, the library board is a board of the city of East Lansing. Your no is a FOIA entity.
So, on this one, current and available historic records, I just, if you were reading this, how would you see that it's provided at the East Lansing Public Library? Just the average citizen, what would you think it would be there? Would you think it's in a book? Do you think that it's online at the city
I
library?
think I can go and ask for it.
You can go ask for it, but how would you get it? What would be the response for the library to give it to you?
Well, I'm a ringers.
That we just publish it. When it's available.
Right. So what does that mean? Just so if you were defining what does it mean available, is it because we have a computer here that we can show you at the library?
They also,
Before we had the journal, that was kept in the city hall and at the library. Now are we just thinking that it's electronically available? Is that in everyone's mind so that we know that that's when they go to the library?
they do have some hard copies, but also, I don't know, to me, I have a more clear expectation of getting it at the library than I do at City Hall. Like at City Hall, I would walk in there, I don't know who I'd ask for, but in the library, I know I go to the desk and,
So I would say that, in this, now I guess work, things could have changed while I was gone, before, but what we would receive as a council member upon election was a hard copy of all of our ordinance. And I think the Muni Code created like 15 copies or something like that. One of those copies is already at city library, and I think that's what this is referring to. So I don't think there's really an issue. You get this stuff by electronic means. I mean, it may need to say electronic, but electronic means, and there's a hard copy that actually is created.
Are you doing the hard copy?
Well, I'm not sure the hard copies are up.
Well, they're supposed to be updated and they were.
Every time a council member was elected, so that every 2 years, they would ask for the book back. And the
They
clerk
update it.
would update it, or the city council.
I don't think the community codes give updates other than electronic. The point, that's what we got to verify. They used to send you a printed packet for every 15 books that you have to update it physically. I don't think that happens anymore.
Well, if it doesn't, we should inquire on how that would be done. If we're not getting a hard copy anymore, then forget everything I just said. But I thought that the library had and that was maintained a hard copy of the city ordinance. I did not get, let me just say, I didn't get a new copy when I got elected this time, so I'm not sure what's going on. I know that there were like 6 copies sitting in what was the council office, and now it's the grant writer, where the grant writer is, so
So
they can still
what you're
be in
saying
it.
is accurate, then they're not. Used to.
Right, but the question is, should we still require electronic or print and printed? Because sometimes this isn't available. Or if you're hacked,
yes,
You
you
can't
definitely want a hard copy.
and then you need hard copies to be
Or at least a download, a digital copy.
something.
Right. But also, my concern too was, I'm concerned about a push from. But the library has digital access. So if you do not have digital access at your home or whatever, you can get the online version of the library.
So, go ahead, Lynn.
My other concern is that, as I understood our earlier discussions, not everything is digitized at this. I'm concerned with the way in which this proposal has been written. It's all current and available historical records of, shall be available on the city's website and or from City Hall along with the library. I don't know that, I'm concerned that there's some conflict in that language about them being available, everything's available on the city website.
Doesn't say that.
What if we just eliminated the library?
And available, that's why we added
I think
available.
what you're saying is, along with the East Lansing Public Library, for this first sentence, eliminating that would be helpful, because at City Hall, if you wanted, they're gonna go dig it up. We talked about going downstairs to
Right.
Hannah. But then the second sentence that's in here, any reference of public documents addressed in this charter. So anything that relates to this charter would be available at all three places.
Right,
That leaves the things like all the documents on site plans and everything that aren't digitized are not available at the city library, but City Hall will get them for you because they will be available, because they have to get them. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Yeah, I think this originally just kind of tracked, you know, we do notices at City Hall and at the library. Stick it up on the board.
Yeah,
So
I know.
We stuck that line, so, you know. On with,
I answer to your original question. I would think if I can go to the library and the librarian will try to help me find it.
That's what I want to
That's
say.
my answer to your question. Not that I'm gonna find a good book, but there's someone there that can help me. And maybe we need to do a little training on these people, librarian staff, so they know where to look for stuff.
They are,
But that's
they're being trained, so they're very much into the charter. They've got a room, Quick Lansing history, they want it to all. And then they're digitizing records.
Good, that's exactly what I hope that people understood it to be, that the library will help you find the information.
Correct. Well, maybe do the City Hall for.
Right, for site plans and the historical documents that.
or the basement. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't not
send
sending
out
it to the basement.
You have to do it yourself.
And you will be lost and never see it again.
Can we go down there after the next meeting? I can try to and see what's the trip.
Still should.
I don't, that would have to be up to you.
Robert's got to do.
I've never been, I'd like to take it.
Do it.
You need minor.
All right,
So
so,
class.
so we're gonna put that on the agenda for next time, yeah, at the end. Okay,
Shop class.
review of the document, it's a public thing, so anyone's here, but review of document locations would be on the agenda.
That's not near.
Because I think that's one way to get public to come, you said, we're gonna go down the basement of Hannah. But it is our public, it's our public meeting next time, so, that would be good.
Would we have to go down back and the meeting?
Meeting?
Yes, yes. If you want to do that,
You
you can open and close the public meeting.
All together down there. I'm just saying, I don't.
So maybe a violation of their charter. Review
I think-
committees on the road.
Yeah, I think it's good to put it on there. If we're gonna go down there as a group, we look at it and come back up. Then we know that there's documents of how they are, and that is how we would address those, if someone asked us. All right, financial reports. Budget documents will be available on the cities and the East Lansing since they're completed. That's pretty common. That's what's been happening. They're everywhere.
Yeah, so that's what I would do. That sort of already happens. I'm trying to think about this since the last meeting. If there's something from version A that I'd like to see put in here, it would be in this section that we mandate some sort of reporting on projects which receive taxpayer funds in order to try to create more transparency.
So you're looking at 8.5 on draft A.
Yeah, something like that, because I've had several people mention this. Could be different, could be like people have a perception of things, maybe it's not reality. In the last 2 months, I've seen so many people comment online on all the city financial stuff that they think one of the reasons the city's in financial trouble is TIF, pilot, tax subsidies on deals. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. I don't know the answer to it. I see Mark engage with some of the people very, explaining things for people are misguided on things. I don't know if you could get a real answer on that without some sort of serious economic study, but I'm very curious. Just my own, I wonder, with these deals that were made 20 years ago, how did they impact the city's finances? Maybe some of them have helped, maybe some of them hurt. So the goal of 8.5 was, and maybe this is already supposed to happen. Someone said 1 or 10, they're supposed to have this or that or whatever, but I think we've seen that maybe that doesn't always happen, or it does, it's not done in a way that public sees it enough. So is there a way to have some required financial analysis when taxpayer resources? The goal and intent of that being that will shine the light on a project a little bit more if taxpayer money is going to be used for it. We're trying to protect the taxpayers so that the city doesn't continue to be in bad financial straits. We have transparency on these projects and on the financial impact it would be. It will help council and make a better decision as to whether we should provide some of those benefits.
So what if we put financial reports, A is what's under our proposal B, simplified version. And for 8.3B, we write economic impact assessment. City shall conduct a written economic impact assessment available to the public prior to the approval of any tax increment financing, payment in lieu of taxes or other tax or use of other taxpayer funds, subsidies or incentives collectively defined as resources for the benefit of a private or quasi-private person or development of the project that may impact the city's general finances. So it's really that first sentence that you have, that's in proposal A, 8.5A, that would move into this to be 8.3B. So we're putting the budget documents, we're putting economic impact assessment in here. And I would just leave it at that versus for transparency. I don't want to do I wouldn't propose the reporting at this point in time because that language, there's a lot more into that. But if you have that written impact assessment that at any point in time, someone could look at that and see if it's really kind of following through.
Yeah.
I don't know that in the charter we want to see it's going through. It's almost like some of the stuff in here, I think is a good ordinance. When you talk specifically about the coordinator and some of that stuff, and I would put on financial transparency, the reporting in that ordinance.
Well, I think that would be an improvement. You don't want to do the reporting, I'm gonna live with it. I think this is all very, very important. I'm also sort of ready to get some rather than continue to debate it. But on the other point on that would be if you added the rest of the 8.5A. I took economic impact assessment from, I didn't come up with that term, that's a thing in financial analysis that I found from other, maybe Robert can explain, maybe he's familiar with it or something, but this is something that came from like good government type groups for analyzing projects. That's where I got that from. Take it up. So just maybe the second sentence is sort of, or second and third sentence, try to define and explain what that is so it's clear. Because otherwise maybe it's not clear, and I don't know about to add more language, but.
Well, as a council member, I know what the economic impact assessment would be, so I would be following that charter. But I think in an ordinance, if you were talking about transparency and an ordinance that was there, you talked about the information coordinator, and then you had the financial transparency, that's where I think on review of the economic impact assessment, there will be a reporting. And putting that into an ordinance would make more sense to me because that's all related to this whole package stuff. And it's sort of complementary to what you're saying in the charter.
Okay.
Fleshes it out in more detail.
Maybe I'm confused. I wasn't saying anything else about a coordinator. I'm just saying sort of the point like Joe brought up a couple times earlier. How do you sell this? Why do you sell? Maybe it's self-evident. Explain that an economic impact assessment is meant to how does it impact the city's general finances, but also how does it affect property values, economic growth, job creation. I think that could be a helpful selling point. That's all I'm saying about it.
I have two quick comments on this. One, I think that, I support adding the first two sentences. I think the third sentence is more, explanatory than, a demand. You know, kind of consistent with what we discussed last time, that, the charter should be demands as opposed to explanation. I think that we should also add a sentence to the end that this section doesn't create a cause of action. Because what that means in lay terms is that nobody could sue to stop development of a pending project or an already completed project based on the failure of the city to do this. So it still creates the obligation for the city to do it. But I know when we talked about this months ago, I said red tape. And I've changed my view on that. I don't think this is red tape, but I also think that we should make it clear in here that this can't be used by someone who's acting nefariously to prevent development in the city that council has already done, if that makes sense. So I think the language I have is the legalese way to make it that this section shall not or does not create a cause of action. Lane, you might be, or Tony.
That's a very good point, because candidly, it doesn't require for us to fail to do something, for someone to claim that we have, and then try to put the stymie on a development project because it'll impact them first.
Well, I think that as a layperson is unenforceable. Like we're saying this, but it's not really a thing.
Okay, Jill had her hand up.
I think we have to be very careful about the timing of when this is done. It's got to be done, the proposal that's going to council. Not a proposal at a time. It's going to be the financial impact of the final one going to council.
Yeah,
I
well,
think,
sorry, I'm voting.
yeah, I think, because if not, I think we owe the developer some things to not, when they're not ready to announce stuff that isn't final yet. I don't think that's fair.
30 days prior to approval.
Correct.
Yeah, I thought that's sort of what I tried to do by saying 30 days prior to. That's sort of, that's just John said.
And I left the
This
30 days out when I read this.
This language just reflects what we do. I'll just say that there isn't a single use of tax increment financing in Lansing that hasn't had an economic impact study associated with it. The state requires that we talk about the job creation and the other things that are associated with it. And just right, I think there's people still sort of pitch TIF as some kind of city giveaway. It's the city also, and actually you could put that in here. We have a resolution, we have a policy that only allows us to use TIF for environmental cleanup and city-owned activity. So even the parking garage in downtown East Lansing that went on parking lot number 1, it's a $23 million TIF that turns into, almost $50 million. All we're doing is we're collecting all the taxes from the developer. We're returning the taxes as payment because we required them to build us that we own a parking structure. And that's the way that we have conducted in our new policy we adopted in, I think, 2015, limits the use of TIF even where the state allows it to be other things. So, or that could be put in there.
Can you, so when it's not TIF, it's a pilot or some other.
Yeah,
Does the same thing happen?
Pilot, so I've never done that. And plus, I know that we may be asked to do that soon, but the last pilot that was done was for the PK and the low to moderate income housing location next to Valley Court Park, and that was done by the fire council.
Elbert Street was a pilot, wasn't it? Right. So that's what kind of got me really going on this, because there was none of this was done. It was that one put together by Dempsey the day that council was to vote, and it was like a 2-page thing. And it was just like, here's a parking garage.
The parking
Yeah.
lot. Parking lot by Peanut Barrel.
It's ACD development.
They asked for.
They asked pilot, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that, well, I mean, you know, where that went.
Yes, but that's the sort of thing that the intention of this would be like, when those projects happen, to try to have an analysis done that the public can review. Because the council member can review and everybody benefits from this kind of information, right on.
Well, there's the other part of this, Jeff, you know, all this information, which would be required by this change, is already done. But we're not talking about, you know, 20 pages. We're talking about 200 or 300 pages of information that is available to the public. What we should be doing is we can peel out this type of information and make sure it's in a separate packet that the public clearly review, and that's not something we've done.
So it sounds like you're okay with, you don't see a problem with.
I don't see a
and
problem
the
with the
first
plan.
and the second sentence and third sentence, which you would,
I don't mind it, I just don't think it's, I don't think it's.
I'm talking about the third sentence that you're proposing.
Oh, my third, oh, I see. I,
And I actually think that Jonathan's got a good point about making sure it doesn't create a cause of action, because I'm going back to our definition of misconduct, and the failure to act or not act based on an ordinance or a charter provision would constitute misconduct in office. I don't want anybody coming back under these FOIA positions potentially and saying, you know, whoever the coordinator is or something, failed to provide this information, and therefore they're going to push forward and ask for somebody to be dismissed or removed or something. I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but in my past jobs, I've sat there and seen some pretty ridiculous things, at least flat.
yeah, and that's just, my main thing here is I don't want us to unintentionally, with good intentions on our part, do something that's gonna end up costing the city a lot of money.
Exactly.
Do you
So that,
want that sentence to apply to this section or this chapter?
I think under FOIA, it can't apply to the chapter as a whole, right? Because there is a cause of action of FOIA. So I think it would just
Not
have,
under this section.
I think it would just have to be under this section.
So let's just do financial reports, or maybe we just call 8.3 budget documents. And then you do what's there, and then you do financial transparency on project financial transparency on projects within the city as its own separate heading. You know, so it's 8.4 and then other public records under FOIA is 8.5. Does that make sense?
Analysis on city projects using public funds, not every,
Okay,
not every time.
Yeah.
well, say that again, say financial.
But we use public funds on everything. So I
So
think.
that makes
I
it
think
sound
we
like some
can't
guy
just
wants
say
to build a
public
house,
funds.
and he wants to build some building and no funds, and we have to talk about his financials.
Well,
That's
one
not-
part of that, so like,
I think Jeff is talking about specifically TIF.
Right,
You know, I
we're
mean,
heading of
We
every
we
fund, yeah.
refer to those specifically, I think.
well, I tried to also try to say, may impact the city's general finances, which I think I may be wrong now, this is months ago. I think that came from the finance section of the charter, where I tried to mimic the language that you could say. You can't just say like, oh, I don't know, someone's getting a sidewalk repaired, it's gonna benefit Joe Schmo. It's no, it's like this affects the city.
I kind of don't like the squishiness of may impact the city's finances. I'd rather it be that it does impact this. But I think that opens up the door to the council saying, well, we don't think this impacts the city's finance. Like, I think it needs to be something objective as opposed to subjective.
You're using public funds.
It's like, I'm talking about the end of sentence 1, that may impact the city's general finances. I think it should just say, I prefer effects, because I don't like impact as a verb, but that affects the city's finance, the city's general finances.
If somebody just hires 5 people, that impacts the city's finances
But
because of the income tax. So, yeah, so we have everything under any kind of business at all, we have to be.
Well,
reporting. We use that.
I don't think so, because I don't know the ins and outs of planning, but I think we're just talking about TIF and.
Right.
So it's not it's just those specific.
Talking about TIF, but
you're also talking if the city provides a payment in lieu of taxes. They're not-
The intent of this is to be substantial.
It's under state law.
Yeah, so I mean, if you
We
go
have to
to
replace it.
establishing economic development set of the policy, it's what
There you go.
Government Finance Officers Association best practices are. And they get into a lot of this right under their policy. We should address all of this assessment.
I think we just say this.
The intent was this is like major you thought options.
This is using taxpayer
Yeah.
funds to support development. I think that's clear in language.
Right.
So to address, Jeff, which we all heard, that transparency is really going more than just saying we're FOIA. We
Yeah,
have some
this makes it a lot, this
specific
makes me feel more comfortable.
things. And
It's
then,
a compromise.
Marriage.
and then the last 2.4 would be 2.5.
Can I go back to 8.3A, and it's just a minor change, but budget documents and financial reports will be available. Again, back to Jonathan's point that these need to be directives. It shall be available on the city's website as soon as they are completed.
Need to say as soon as they're completed, or is that kind of,
Well, maybe,
extraneous language?
I think having a timeline saying we're doing this right away is better than saying, well, it'll be there in 2 weeks.
Let me, I'll give some examples. So if someone came and asked for some preliminary budget stuff now, you have to produce it.
We do, because the preliminary budget is there for the public hearing they held last Tuesday. So yeah, it's gotta be on their website, it's gotta be available to the residents.
I read the language doing the opposite of what you're talking about. Because I read the language saying that we're not gonna update the charter 18 months later. We're gonna put this on the website as soon as it's done.
Okay,
That's how I read that.
okay, I can read that way. I'm sorry.
Then the rest of 8.4, which would be numbered 8.5, because we have the other one in there. The FOIA, this is a little different. The FOIA coordinator is appointed by city council. You had that different, not you, proposal A had it different, the city manager.
I thought that for some reason, clerk or Robert said they.
The council's policy has me as the FOIA coordinator or my designee.
Didn't matter to me, I just thought I.
We had, the council policy, which was did have that, but it was supplanted by an administrative order issued by the city manager. And it was repealed, our resolution was repealed. I can't remember why we did that, to be honest, but the council was okay with it going in that direction, but a resolution has a specific power under the charter. I'm not sure what an administrative order does, but the administrative order and the former city council resolution did appoint the city manager as the coordinator and give him authority to identify other, like assistant, coordinators. Got one in police.
The buck.
One fire, one place.
Yeah, the bus to the south. Manager.
And it basically was the same like.
Just, who creates the administrative order? Is that a council thing? Is that?
No, that's the city manager. I mean, you could say that it'd be by resolution of the city council because that's what it did. I think I mentioned last time, we had what we thought was a due process issue. So we changed the manner so that the mayor is handles the appeal from a denial. Rather than essentially the city manager who was handling appeals from denial was also the person who theoretically made the decision to begin with.
Right, and it makes it a public act. Elected.
Okay, so I think Tony has some good stuff to work with here. We can kind of see for next meeting, so that'll be on the agenda. Then 6.5, which is the next thing.
Sorry, do we really do 8.4 or is that all settled?
So I just asked a little bit.
Okay, sorry. Adding up, see if there's any comments here. There's the top, that's chapter 8 or part of the example.
You know what,
But this is gonna be, side, this is its own.
I think we said it was its own section, so, we can look at the index and figure out which place to put it. If you wanna do that right now, as a suggestion, let's do that, since we're on this.
can make it two. Chapter 2.
That's what we talked about before. I think it actually should goes better to be after 2. Look at it, right? Because two says the general municipal powers, and then we go into transparency of public records access, and then we go into provisions of the city, which is the officer. That's what we have the powers of the city and exercise of powers in 2. Then we go into transparency and public records access. Seems like boundaries to transparency. It seems like you'd rather have the powers and then you'd have the transparency. Does that make sense? It'll be chapter 3, proposed chapter 3.
Chapter 3.
Then just keep bumping them all down.
When we're talking about chapter 3, the heading, general provisions affecting officers of the city. I think that only deals with elected officers, or I don't know if it's possible to add, I think that's a word. The heading. That's correct, I just keep reading that. The officers. And the section says something about weapons.
So, let's talk about putting that in the table of contents. That's our heading for the table of contents. So we'll put table of contents as one of our items to review. Because then it'll move over to the chapters. So 6.5 is the next thing on our agenda, which we said is we were going to do after we got chapter 8 or now chapter 3 finished, and we're not quite finished with that, so we'll do that after, and then continue discussion on chapter 20. So let's go back to that one. First thing is the headings. For the convenience only. We can keep that, but that'll be our table of contents is our headings.
These 20.1, 0.2, and 0.3 are really just standard contract terms that are absolutely necessary from a legal perspective. And so the reason that it references, so like just at a basic level, the reasons that we reference the headings is just like to Jeff's point, saying actually chapter 3 references officials, but it's only elected officials. Somebody could use that as a legal argument to try to invalidate a portion of it or its interpretation. So this simply references that your heading, even if it could be arguably misleading, it in no way binds the language that's in the actual chapter. So that's the reason for that. And likewise, 20.2 is what's called a severability clause generally. Every contract generally would have that, because absent that piece, if any judge were to find a portion, even a sentence of our chapter, of our charter, void or as unenforceable, as unconstitutional, whatever it might be, blacks the whole thing out. And so that's the only reason for that. And then 20.3 just references how you would amend the charter, which is the process we're actually right now. So
Okay, so sounds like we leave it as is. And the schedule was really how the charter was created, leave that as is. And at this point, nothing else added to that. So we've added what we wanted to add to the transparency.
We can keep this historical study.
We talked about like the remove, having a section that reference back to the removed sections of the,
Of the change.
Kind of like a historical tracking.
historical thing. And I think if you put in like 20.4, sections removed through amendment, previous sections removed through amendment or something like that, then do you actually need anything other than 20.1, 2, 3? And the historical.
And the footnotes, kind of like footnotes, yeah.
Because this stuff is, it's archaic and there's no reason for it.
And by its own language, it says that it constitutes part of the charter. They're only required to accomplish the end of inaugurating the government of the city.
So it can be
So it can easily be.
included, eliminated. That would be maintaining 20.1, 20.2, and 20.3 and removing the remainder. Yeah, and but adding in 20.4 that makes reference to section that are all
Past changes.
The ones that are.
I've got one other small thing on 20.
Sure.
It's probably not a big deal, but we should probably have what's called a savings clause in the charter, which essentially what that means is that any of our changes, so it's because, especially because we're proposing changes to the misconduct sections, a savings clause prevents anything. If we don't have a savings clause, anything that occurred prior to the amendment would no longer be prosecutable after the adoption of the new charter, after the adoption of the new amendment. And what a savings clause does is it protects, it preserves any of the old, anything that happened before the amendment, so that can still be prosecuted if necessary. So it could be
Something in progress.
it's something that's in progress. It should be pretty simple. And
Yeah, so we would add that as 20.4.
yeah,
20.5,
Or, so, I mean,
sections removed, you want it before sections removed.
I think sections removed would be the last one.
Okay.
The 20.4.
All right, I know we're going past 9, but a couple of things. First thing is, we talked about the preamble motions. I don't want to discuss that tonight, but I'd like you all to come back at our next meeting, say what you'd like in a preamble, or if you feel like now looking at the whole thing, you've addressed some things. That I think you each have to have some input onto where do we go from there, rather than having someone draft a preamble or something like that. We at least get an idea of what we want to be in there before we go and spend some time doing that. We have some more meetings to discuss that, but that's the homework for you. The other thing is, I said that we would have an update on this list, and Grace and I are going to make sure that we have, so we know what's been listed. And I want to add a column here. What's the change that we've done, so that we have like a clip note version of why we did the change. So, like chapter 3.3 is term of office was changed to after the canvass. That's when the term of office gets. So we have that little caveat for each of these to explain it. That will also help when they're drafting the ballot language. Yes.
Could I just ask, and maybe it's a burdensome thing, I hope not. At the conclusion of all of our amendments, can somebody run a complete revised charter for us to look at?
Without the red lines.
Exactly what aligns with our adopted changes, so we might be able to read it and see what it might look like once, if we can get all of these changes. Because we've been back and forth with a lot of things. There may be, before our last meeting, there may be something that we're missing that would stick out for us at that point.
Great. That would help also for the public hearings that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you
really handle it.
Okay, so we'll have this with our clip notes. That'll be coming, and then our whiteboard will work on that after we have the public hearing, quasi-public hearing on all our changes. this will help because this will go out with the packet, the agenda and packet about what changes are there. And so people would have a chance to see that. That's the first of many chances to see the whole thing. And we really kind of went through everything. I think now we should be proud of ourselves. We got through 20 chapters, but we've added some. And I think we're almost all on the same page with all the changes that we're going to propose. We just need to see them and improve them in their final version and then have them printed that way. So that's good. And I would just like you just to double check on when we come back, make sure I caught everything on the whiteboard that we were looking at. I mean, some of it isn't related to the charter specifically, but I know like Pam's the second one was our churches, the appropriate precincts, and we would turn around and have that discussion. Send that up to council.
The thought is we do a report. In addition to this, we have these other things we recommend you look at. Yeah, okay.
Sound good? Anything else? Hey, a motion to adjourn. So move.
Second.
Discussion. All
I hear something.
those in favor say aye. We are adjourned.